What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Make It Custom. I'm Carl Fisher, and today we've got a wicked video for you guys that are looking to get into metal shaping and you don't know where to start. I'm covering fundamentals today, no power tools. We're gonna go with sandbag, tucking fork, tucking stump, and we're also gonna use the English wheel. So I'm gonna cover a bunch of information in this right now, and this is kind of like a preview to what our classes are going to be like at Make It Custom. That's right, we're going to have classes at Make It Custom coming up in November and December. We've got our dates. They're November 8th to the 10th and 14th to the 16th in December. So get on to japhandskustoms.com right now if you want to get your spot, because guaranteed they're going to sell out super fast. Hope to see you there. Let's get into this video. All right, so metal shaping 101, super simple basics. There are three things that you need to know that everything boils down to in metal shaping: shrink, stretch, and form. Those are the basis of why we use paper patterns. That's like how you're gonna make a gas tank side. That's, you know, you have to be able to look at a shape and figure out the easiest way, because you could build a beautiful compound curve like a bowl. You could do that completely with just shrink. You could also do that completely with just stretch. So knowing when to use those two is kind of something that will come to you once you've started to play with the different techniques. Now, there's a lot of different hand techniques that we can do for shrink, stretch, form. Obviously, you have power hammers, we've got planishing hammers, there's another kind of power hammer, reciprocating hammers, bead rollers for forming. There's all kinds of different power tools that you can go nuts with. But you know, what the basics were, what most people did back in the day, is sandbag, shrinking stump, and English wheel if you're lucky, or you're planishing by hand. You know, we'll get into that a little bit later, but like planishing, if you don't know what I mean by that, you're just a beginner. Planishing is just like tons of small hits to smooth out a piece of metal. So just to clarify that. So we can do that also with the English wheel. We can planish metal with the English wheel by just smoothing it out, but you're rolling it in between two dies. So I think to get started, we're gonna talk about the different types of shrink. So if you're hand shrinking, you've got a couple different options. You can go to a shrinking stump like we have here. This has a convex bowl in it, and you'll see all kinds of different shrinking stumps. This is just our rendition of a shrinking stump. We call this the Mother Tucker shrinking stump, basically, because we've designed our own tucking hammer. And if you hear me say tuck, I also mean shrinking. You're creating a tuck, which is actually a fold or a wrinkle in the metal, which we're going to show you in a moment. So this is a tucking hammer, this is a tucking stump or a shrinking stump. And what is happening when you're using a shrinking stump? I'm just going to demonstrate it kind of as we talk, as we go along. We're going to try a couple of the different hand techniques of doing this. So just let me grab my gloves real quick. All right, I got my gloves. I kind of like these gloves. You've seen them. They're like, they obviously get dipped, and they're pretty grippy, so it's nice for sheet metal. Okay, oh, we already got a hammer over there. So part of the reason why we like having the nylon on here is because nylon and nylon have a bit of grip strength together. So when you're smashing a piece of metal in between nylon and nylon, it kind of grips it. That's just a little backstory on why we've got that. It also works really good for smoothing material, and the rebound sort of helps as well. You don't have to use your arms so much. So don't forget your hearing protection. We're gonna be doing a bunch of smashing today. You got yours on, Elio? Yeah. Okay, so to do a tuck with a bowl like this, you could just put this on the edge and give it a smack, and it will pop a tuck somewhere, but you can also be a little bit more accurate with it if you want. And I kind of do, just because this is a round circle, it's gonna want to pop wherever, right? If you've got a bigger panel, you can just kind of run the edge of the panel. You don't really have to do what I'm about to show you, but if you want to be deliberate with where you put a tuck, which will come a little bit more relevant later when we're being very accurate, mapping out our paper pattern, where shrinks are gonna be. So this is what I do if I wanna deliberately put a tuck right in the one spot here. is I'm just going off the edge of this. And I'm just kind of adding a little bit of a crease. What is that doing? That's just weakening the metal just in that one spot, right? So it's path of least resistance type stuff. So if I'm going to use this tucking stump to get this to pop up, you use the edge of the stump, and that's supporting the edge of your sheet metal. It's a void underneath there. And when I pop right at the end of that crease or wherever you want that wrinkle to start, that is how you're going to get a deliberate pop in it, right? So it should pop right up. So that wrinkle that we're seeing, that's a tuck. And how a tucking stump works is that that wrinkle gets put into an opposing shape. So we've got this angle and it's opposing the bowl shape. So if I'm smashing down on top of the ridge of this wrinkle or this tuck, those two angles are going to fight each other, and it's literally going to force the metal into itself. Now, that's something that kind of seems weird because you think about metal and you think about how hard it is, right? Automatically you think, man, metal's really strong, it's really, really hard. But something that I find really helpful is that if you kind of relate metal to clay or dough, like those are two metaphors that I think Ray Chalene is the one that likes to say metal is clay, and Ron Covell, both legendary metal shapers, likes to use dough as the analogy, like rolling out pizza dough if you're using the English wheel and that sort of thing. So what is literally going to happen is the metal will push into itself. It'll kind of like wrinkle into itself and physically become thicker. If we use a micrometer on the metal and find out how thick it is and then do a bunch of shrinks in it, you will be able to measure it again. It will be thicker. That metal had to go somewhere, right? Okay, so now we're in the opposing bowl. We've got our tuck in there, and I'm just going to run that tuck out from the center out. You can see how tight these wrinkles are getting because it's forcing that metal together. So I'm just going to smooth it out. Okay. So if I try and flatten the rest of this disc, where it's kind of got a little bit of a bend in it, let me try and flatten that out. You'll be able to see how much shrink we actually got. Like that's quite a bit of shape that's happening already, and that's just one tuck. So let's put another tuck in this piece of metal a different way. So if you don't have a shrinking stump, I suggest everybody should have one and make one, but we've got another thing called a tucking fork. So a tucking fork is just another little tool that you can totally make yourself at home, and what it's doing is it's allowing you to create a wrinkle or a tuck without a tucking stump. So what you can do is actually, it's just two tapered pieces of steel. I tell people all the time, just go buy two like punches and just cut them up and weld them until it looks like that. And basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna bend a wrinkle or a tuck into our piece here. Okay, so now we've got essentially another way to put a tuck in. So if you're gonna do it this way and you don't have this opposing shape like I've been talking about, how are you gonna get that to push into itself? If I just hammered it on something flat, it would just flatten out, right? So if you have, so something that you can think about is capturing the tuck. That's another term that's used for closing the end of the tuck, and it basically captures this bubble of information or of material, and then that is what is keeping the shape in there. So it's easier to show you. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit on the end of this, and it's gonna bend down, and I'm gonna try and get that flat while still having a little bit of wrinkle here. Okay, that is the plan. I'm actually gonna make this a little bit sharper just because I know it helps a lot with this. So I'll get this to be a little bit sharper. And then what I want to see is I want to see that pop down. And when that pops down, it's kind of locking that material in there. You got to be careful how big that tuck was. We're starting to get it up to a 90 here. You just want to make sure you control that so it doesn't fold over. Okay, you see now I've got this flat and it's kind of tight little wrinkles like what the other side looked like. And we've got this bubble of information. We have captured this tuck by using that technique. So we don't actually need the stump. You could just have a simple little thing there. And now it almost doesn't really matter what way you hammer it out, but I like to just try and hammer in on itself a little bit, just keep hammering in. Okay, you almost can't tell which one's which, but they've both captured quite a bit of material. And just with those two tucks on an 8-inch circle, we've probably got almost an inch. We've probably almost got an inch there. So yeah, there's two techniques that you guys can try at home to get a little bit of shrink happening in your sheet metal. Like, this is so useful for so many different parts. Like if you need to make cab corners, if you need to make like anything with a compound curve, just a tuck here and there might be enough to get you the shape you need or close to it so that you can kind of hammer and dolly the rest. Okay, now what we're gonna do is talk about a bit of stretch. So there's a lot of different kinds of stretching. You might hear the terms linear stretch or radial stretch or kick shrinking, kick stretching, and those are what we're going to go over right now. So when we talk about, well, I guess this is kind of getting a little bit more advanced, because radial stretch is basically when you hit metal on metal with circular dies, right? It's squishing right in the center of those dies, and it's pushing the metal like in a circle around it. Right? If you can just kind of imagine two massive pieces of metal that were relatively flat, but one has a slightly convex curve, and you smash a piece of sheet metal and it forces all the metal around it. That's why it's a radial stretch. Now, a linear stretch is a little bit different die. A linear stretch is something where we would have a flange and we would be trying to stretch the flange to create a curve on an angled piece of metal. You can use linear stretching in, you know, reverse curves on big panels as well. That's not really what we're talking about here. And how does that work with hand metal shaping? Linear stretch by hand would be with like a linear stretch hammer, which also is known as a shark head hammer. I think I have one right here. Let's show you that. So this is essentially how a linear stretch die looks like on a planishing hammer or a power hammer as well. What it is it doesn't have much curve this way, but it has all the curve this way. And so if you were to hit on the edge of a piece of metal like this, it would be stretching that edge linearly in a line. Now, radial stretch with something by hand would just be like a low crown or a high, any crown hammer against a die. So if we took a piece of material, well, I guess we have this one right here too. If we took a piece of material and we put it on top of here and we beat the crap out of it, that would be radial stretching as well, because I do have a slight crown on there, and that against something flat or crowned is going to force the metal around it to grow. And what we mean by that is literally like pizza dough. Like if you're smashing it and it's adding surface area, it has to go somewhere. So it's going to grow up. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that very soon, especially with the English wheel. But I just wanted to quickly demonstrate like how you can stretch with just this, right? So let's throw our earmuffs on. See all these hammer marks? Those hits are stretching it. It may be difficult to see, but listen. Like we're creating a low crown in a panel by just hitting it with a hammer. That's how simple metal shaping is. You know, to physically metal shape it is not difficult, but to know how to do it to get the exact shapes you want, that is what will take time. So this video is for you to jump in, to encourage you to get started and to just play with it, because you're gonna learn so much by just doing what I'm showing you today. If you just go practice these things and figure out how to tuck and how to shrink and how to stretch, those are gonna help you a lot. So yeah, that's like all I'm talking about with radial stretching. The other thing that we're gonna use tons, or that you will use tons in metal shaping, is a sandbag, because a lot of the times you just need to add surface area, right? And you need to do it quickly. So a heavy hammer in a sandbag is gonna add a lot of surface area really quickly, like a lot more than that. I would compare this to if you're planishing, you know, to try and stretch a door skin and do a low crown, or if you're trying to use the power hammer with flat dies, you know, a 36 lower and a flat top to make a low crown panel. That's what you could compare this to, I suppose. Now this is a little bit different. We've got something soft on the bottom rather than hard, and we're using something heavy with a high crown to just get actual stretch and shape in there quickly. So if you can think about blowing a bubble, right? If you can think about blowing a bubble, maybe that's not the best analogy. What I'm trying to say is that there always is going to be more stretch in the center of a compound curve, if you're only stretching, than there will be as you get to the edge. I'd like to show you that actually before we get started. I'd like to show you that with just the paper here. Because this is something that's gonna help you through this whole video. So I just need to grab a pair of scissors. Okay, so what I'm gonna show you with this paper is a demonstration of just how there's gonna be more shrink towards the outside of a panel than there is in the center. There's gonna be more stretch in the center of a panel than there is towards the outside. And that's something that I've been to a few classes and we've taught a few classes, and this is something that I know people struggle with. So I think, even if you think you know this, like, we're just gonna go over it again. So I'm just gonna make a bit of a mark here. We'll cut a little circle. All right, so what I mean by that is that if we're gonna use shrinking techniques to make a bowl this shape, consider this our buck. What is a buck? A buck is anything that you are trying to copy the shape of. You're gonna make a buck to make a gas tank. You're gonna use a buck to create a AC Cobra body. Like, whatever it is, this is gonna be our buck. So let's throw a magnet right there. And if I try and force the paper around this shape right now, the paper isn't gonna give, right? It wants to wrinkle. So we've got, you know, a bunch of wrinkles to put in if we want to get this to be tight to our buck. So here's just a quick visual representation. Those wrinkles are what is needed to get the shape. Those wrinkles are tapered. So the amount of material that needs to be shrunk, pardon me, is more towards the edge than towards the center. Another way we can show you that for stretch is like this. So we put the same paper on, but we cut the center out, and we try to get this to wrap. I guess we should use a smaller piece of paper, but we'll try to just line up part of it. Just gonna make my life easier, get half of that gone. Okay, this will still show you what I mean. So for stretching, it's the same exact thing. These gaps are representing the amount of stretch that the paper needs to take that shape, right? If I want to put that paper nice and tight on there, that's how much material or surface area I have to add in order to get that. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the best way I can explain it. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take one of our pieces of sheet metal, and we're just going to viciously beat it into the sandbag to see how much surface area we can get out of it. How much crown can we put in a panel with just a sandbag? And then we'll smooth it out a little bit. We'll do some hand planishing. All right, so keep in mind that if we're trying to make a compound shape, like if I hit this thing evenly, perfectly, in a pattern all the way along this entire piece of metal, it would just get bigger. It wouldn't actually get any shape. Do you get that? So what you're trying to do is stay away from the edges. The edges are not to be stretched, and that will contain the shape. If you're adding surface area in the center, it's going to grow. If you're adding surface area on the entire thing, it's just going to get wider, if that makes any sense. So also to the effect of like what I explained with we're adding more surface area towards the center, you're going to hit your hammer more times towards the center than you are outwards to get a compound shape. It's probably worth noting here that when I am doing this in a sandbag and you do see these wrinkles happen and the sandbag is becoming a little bit concave, now we have ourselves a shrinking stump, and naturally some of those edges are actually shrinking. So I just wanted to let you know that is happening right now if you're wondering. So I'm just going to keep beating it on a little bit more, try and get a nice even compound shape in it, and we'll smooth it out a little, see how much surface area we've added. Okay, we started our little candy dish here. Obviously very, very rough. And I know it kind of looks like a scary amount of dents in that, but if you've got an English wheel, this will come out very quickly. And even if we hand planish this will actually come out surprisingly quickly. So I think I'll probably use this to planish it out. This is just an old dolly. I found this on Marketplace, I think from a cobbler, but somebody made it at one point. Whenever you're planishing, you'd like to use a die or an anvil that is close to the desired shape, as close as possible, right? That's why we make things like radius gauges. That is so that we can check, okay, what is that radius? Got very lucky there, it's a 7. So this should be pretty close to that. That's why we're gonna use it, right? So for about 2 inches in the center, that's about a 7. And it's a little bit wider that way, so yeah, by having the right radius that you're hammering against, what you're doing is you're allowing the wobbly metal to have gaps underneath it that you can smooth out. If you have too sharp of a piece underneath, like pretend that was a solid anvil and we're trying to smooth things out, it's not actually wide enough to get the bottoms of more than one bump, right? So your piece isn't going to be stable, and you're not going to have a good time planishing. So that's why you kind of always want to have as close to the desired radius as you can as your anvil backing up your flat hammer, right? So let's pop this out of here. we can just do a little bit. This isn't the most stable thing to be using, but it should be fine for us right now. So I'm going to do just a little bit of this by hand, and then the rest I'll just show you in the English wheel, right? So let's just do a little planishing. So this area here, I'll probably just take care of this. You just want to hold it nice and flat on your piece, and obviously like that's going to be our high spot. That's a high spot. So any of these low spots are what you are going to feel touching the actual dolly. And like I said before, planishing is just lots of light hits. We're trying to smooth it. And if we hit too hard, we're going to radial stretch, right? So that's something we're trying to avoid right now. It's too much of that. Okay, so we were probably at that for a solid 2 minutes, and really, that's a pretty good surface to get by hand, right? Like if I'm building something, and and if you actually get this plane to be quite close to what you want, and the surface is the only thing that needs any filling, that's pretty close. And so yeah, you don't have to go much further than that, depending on what you are doing. Right? So this is like very simple stuff. And look at the amount of shape we got out of that. Like that's just a sandbag and a hammer and a little bit of hammering. Very, very simple. So let's throw it in the English wheel just for fun here. Not even sure what that die is, but I'm sure it's close. We are just gonna see what we can do and compare with the English wheel. So this is something, again, you get to adjust the pressure of. So light hammer hits, you can planish, right? Heavy hammer hits, you're going to radial stretch. So light pressure with the English wheel, you can planish. Heavy pressure with the English wheel, you're going to stretch. So right now, I can kind of move it in between the dies a bit. That's a little too loose, right? So I'm going to tighten it up a little bit. You can kind of hear it a little bit. As we do this, it's going to get looser, because we're hammering down the high spots and smoothing out the lows. So already with like one pass, we've already got quite a bit down. We didn't quite run over that yet. Let's get that. Right, very, very light pressure. We've taken down all the high spots. You can kind of see the marks where the wheel is touching, right? It's only touching the highs. So we'll give it another 1/8 of a turn there. All right, give it another 1/8. Well, let's just have a look at that surface. You can see more of the tooling marks now because it's actually touching quite a bit of it. But at some point, we're going to start to hear the wheel being in contact the entire time. We're not going to hear any of that rough terrain anymore. And that's when you kind of know that you've gone as far as you need to, and any more is going to continue stretching, right? We can make this even smoother by cross wheeling, but I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of the difference and how easy it is to do it with the wheel versus doing it by hand. So wheels are not a very expensive tool in the grand scheme of things, and I think it's worth owning. A sandbag is obviously relatively inexpensive, but the wheels themselves, if you get a Harbor Freight wheel, I know a lot of people, they might say whatever they want about a Harbor Freight wheel, but the reality is you've got all the dies, and the only thing that is a little bit left to improve is the frame itself. I built this out of a Harbor Freight wheel, so all I did was use the dies that it came with and actually built a much stronger frame. I built this to do the first chop on a car 15 years ago, and I use it all the time. So you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to spend $10,000. You don't have to make excuses that you can't get started in metal shaping, because you can go on Marketplace and find somebody's used Harbor Freight wheel for a couple $100. Or, I mean, I've seen people just make their own wheels too. There's all kinds of ways to do it. So anyway, without jumping into all that, I just wanted to show you how we're stretching on the English wheel. There are other ways too. You can actually linear stretch on the English wheel as well. Think of this, if you had 2 flat dies in here, and you just angled one of them a little bit, so it was just a little tighter on one end than the other, and you fed a piece of angled sheet metal in there, like the flange, it would actually stretch that flange out by rolling it through and start to give you this beautiful curve. So there's so many different applications and different ways to use these simple tools to make your life easier doing panels. So there's a couple ways that we can stretch. I think that I do want to actually show you guys the linear stretch stuff by hand as well, because it's just worth knowing that you can do it by hand. We'll do a little bit of shrinking of flange by hand as well next. Let's just hop onto that. And then we might even bash out a bit of a gas tank. All right, so we've just quickly bent up a couple, just little 90s of 18 gauge sheet metal. That's the other thing I forgot to mention, is that we are using 18 gauge sheet metal today. For the most part, if you're restoring an old car, 19 gauge is what most of them are. A lot of people use 20 because it's easier than 18. My personal thoughts, if I don't have 19, I'll make it thicker. So I like to struggle. As far as linear stretching goes by hand, I was talking about the shark-headed hammer. So this is just kind of has 2 different ends that are sort of the same, but they're just 90 degrees to each other, depending on what way you're using it. Are you coming at it like this, or are you coming at it like that? So if you've got a dolly that's relatively flat, this is going to work for you. You can just use a piece of plate, anything really. But if I am hammering on this edge and focusing a little bit more towards this edge than that edge, right? It should stretch this edge more than it stretches in there, and we should start to see it start curving. You can even just see by those marks themselves what they look like, what it's trying to do, right? It's deepest in the center of the mark, so it's pushing the metal sideways. Okay, there are probably some better hammer heads to do this with, but that is curving it. I'm not sure if you can see that very easily, so I'm going to show you with this. That's the amount of shape that we got just with a few minutes, not even minutes, seconds, attacking that edge. Now look at all those marks that are in there, right? That's kind of a bit brutal. That is why people use a planishing hammer with linear stretch dies, is that the dies themselves can be really, really flat and super polished because they have so much power and there's so many hits happening that it can keep that material very, very smooth. In fact, I have an example of that. One sec. If you look back on our old videos, we actually show you how to make a linear stretch tool for like no money. Like if you have an air hammer at home and some scrap metal, you can do this. Definitely go check back and have a look at our linear stretch tool making video. And this is what the flange looks like if you have a nice air hammer or some kind of planishing linear stretch die. Again, something you can do yourself. You don't need to spend all the money on that stuff. But that is the difference, right? Doing it by hand, and you saw how long that took. This whole piece, that much bend, probably only took maybe a minute, if you can believe that, right? It took, you know, maybe 30 minutes to make the tool, or an hour to make the tool, and then a minute to make that. It would have taken you over an hour to do this by hand, so you might as well make the tool. Go check out our video. I'll put it in the description. Anyway, linear stretch by hand. You can also kick shrink linear stretch. I don't really feel like I need to show that to you, but we have the linear stretcher here, and we might as well. It does the same thing. It marks it, but it's much, much quicker, right? Every foot kick, you can see how much it's really getting out of it, right? So much more efficient than doing it by hand, right? Those tools are actually relatively inexpensive as well, and that's how we've been doing most of our stretching for most of the time we've been doing this. So also, if you can afford one, linear stretcher, great, great tool. Now, how would you shrink this? You can obviously shrink this in a kick shrinker, but there's another way to do it by hand, which is, again, relatively easy. What we can do is use this same tucking fork, and we can add our tucks into this flange, which this is a little bit big for what we're doing. Like the size tucking fork is kind of massive, and how far apart those are is kind of too far. Let me see, can I tighten you up? Yep. I just close the gap in between there. We've been using them for many years, so it's gotten tighter over time. But this is, again, doing the same thing. We're collecting that material, and we're going to have a way to capture the tuck, so to speak. Now, we're not really going to have a whole lot of room to capture the tuck, although you can. You probably can. It would just be pretty difficult to do. We have another technique for this. If you've got a bent piece or a welded piece like this, what you can do is you can connect the two sides, vice grip, now that those sides are connected, you can go to a dolly, which I'm not sure if this is going to work that well for us, but we're going to try it. Might have to go to one of them over there. Let's see if we can get this in here. That's not working too well. Let's find a different dolly here. This one will work, I think. That'll get in there. Okay, here we go. We're going to stick it in this vise. Now, if you were wondering about all of our Mother Tucker stump setups, I'm going to talk about these in a minute if you haven't seen them yet. We've been kind of working on ways to store all this stuff in a way that saves space. And we're thinking about garage guys, you know. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But now I've got this flat surface and I've connected both these sides. This is essentially capturing the tuck now. It's making it so that these points are stronger than the forces that are going to be created by us smashing these down, opposing it, right? So let's smash some of these. I'll just grab any old hammer. Okay, so there's another hand way that you can shrink flanges. This is a technique that I think if you don't have a shrinker, like a kick shrinker, you'll probably use this a lot. I don't really know any other way to curve flanges other than like a hammer forming type thing, or, you know, if you're on the fly, that's just, it's a nice curve. It's only 3 little tucks that we put in there, right? Okay, now we've covered that. Okay, we're just gonna have a little bit of fun now, I think. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna kind of come up with a nice organic shape that sort of resembles the side of a motorcycle tank, and then we're gonna use all the things we just learned to make the actual piece. Now, I must give you the disclaimer that this is gonna be pretty quick, but shaping versus templating is actually much quicker. So it's easy for us to make a shape when we don't have to match it to something. So I'm not trying to say that I'm some sort of wizard that can bust out a tank half and like by hand in half an hour, because it's not actually trying to be anything. That is the part that will take the time. That is the part where we'll have to like use paper patterns to show where the shrink's gonna be, make sure that there's enough shrink in certain areas and map ourselves out, and then try and duplicate that on the other side, right? So that is what takes all the time, is those things. The actual shaping itself takes less than you think. So just for fun, to demonstrate what we did today, we're gonna do that and make ourselves a little gas tank side. I have not built a motorcycle in so long. I'm so sorely missing building a motorcycle that I think that you guys are gonna see it on the channel pretty soon. Ellie and I have been talking about it quite a bit. I don't know. That's a very ugly tank. Or it could be a beautiful tank. Depends what kind of motorcycle it is, I guess. But let's just go to town. You know what? I'm gonna make this a little bit rounder. Let's make this a little bit rounder. Make it a little more round in the front. Ah, I like it better already. Again, if you're a beginner watching, this is a throatless shear. That's what they're called. This particular one is a Beverly. They're kind of the brand people think about when they think about types of shears like this. I don't know if they invented it, but they definitely became the most popular to have it because of how high quality their shears are. The beautiful thing about a throatless shear is that you can actually turn both directions. Now our shape that we're cutting right now isn't going to show that, but because of the way the blade is shaped on a Beverly shear, it's actually kind of shallowed and ground in such a way where you can actually turn the other way. So if you see whenever at a garage sale or an estate sale or something, pick it up because they are not cheap. Believe it or not, this thing will do like 10 gauge. They make ones that are specific for sheet metal, but I think this one can do 10 gauge. Okay, so I'll probably just start out by pounding out the center a little bit, get a little bit of that shape to grow. If we were gonna put this into the stump right away, we would just put a bunch of big tucks in the side and the center wouldn't really be touched. Whether or not you do the tucks first or the sandbag first, doesn't really matter. But we're just gonna try and get a ton of crown out of this round shape and make it nice and smooth. We're gonna try and make sure that it's not, you know, a bunch of highs and lows, so we'll evenly do that. That will be the objective since we're not actually trying to put it on anything. We're gonna just try and make sure that it is smooth and aesthetically looks nice. Okay, ear protection. Like I said, there's the most amount of surface area needs to be added at the highest amount of crown. So this type of shape, where is that gonna be? Probably right there. So I'm gonna start by hammering in the center and stretching out from there, focusing most of my hammer blows into the center. There's not gonna be a whole ton in this area. If you can visualize, say like a Harley motorcycle tank, the side of it just kind of curves this way and doesn't actually do a ton of this. So that's more form. Form is just kind of like bend, not real shape. There's gonna be a little bit there, don't get me wrong, but it's not gonna be extreme. Most of it will be right here. See how this is deforming, right? This is all part of form. So a lot of the times when you're metal shaping, whatever you're doing to it is going to change the form. It's gonna change the panel's arrangement. When I talk about that, like it's arranged in a certain way right now. What if I bend it back this way? You know, I didn't actually change any shape. I didn't do anything. I didn't stretch and I didn't shrink. I only formed, right? So form isn't actually changing any shape. So there's a lot of times when you gotta fight your panel, you've gotta change the way the panel is shaped to maybe get the panel into a machine or to get it onto a dolly or to get it into your shrinking stump so that you can still get another tuck in it. There is a lot of in and out of form, in and out of arrangement. So you're bending your panel constantly. You're constantly fighting it. And it's something that is worth noting because every class that we've done, everybody in the class at some point struggles with this because they'll bring their piece and we'll have a look at the piece, right? Oh, it's like pretty close. You just need a little bit of shrink here, right? So we'll go back and shrink that spot. And that person will come back and they'll be like, I don't know what happened. The panel is like not even close anymore. And then you grab the panel and you show them that you've got to bend it back into the arrangement where it fits the buck the best. right? If you don't do that each time you check, then you'd have no baseline, right? The baseline is you made your panel bend as close as possible to fitting what you're trying to make. And if you don't do that every single time, why even check it? Because it's not going to be right. You have to have a baseline somewhere. So you will form it back into whatever it is. I know I just kind of went off right now, and we're trying to make this gas tank side, but worth mentioning, that is what form is, right? We're going to be doing it tons in just this piece as well. Now let's go to the shrinking stump. Because we've done all this blocking, that's another word for stretching with a hammer in a sandbag, is you are blocking. So sometimes people call it a blocking hammer as well. So we can go over to the shrinking stump now, and if we run this in the edge of that shrinking stump, especially because we've got all this material here that's already kind of work hardened a little bit and stretched, it's gonna only pop the wrinkles into the edges. All right, so you see all these wrinkles that have been popping up, forcing it into that concave bowl. Now we're gonna start running those out. That's also why we've got that teardrop shape in there, is for the flatter areas or the straighter areas, we can kind of use that straighter part of our bowl. Okay, now we've got kind of a rough shape going. I think I want to see a little bit more tuck happening here because it's just kind of a flat. What I can do is go into the vise again with our tucking fork. Basically, we're just trying to make ourselves a bunch of wrinkles in there, a bunch of tucks. All right, we've roughed out a motorcycle tank half, if you want to call that. Okay, so now that we've got it kind of close, we probably could have gone to the English wheel even earlier. The English wheel does do a lot of smoothing, but at this point, how do you choose your dies in the English wheel? What do you do? Like, what is next? We could just ram it in there the way we did those pieces, but I think this is worth explaining. So the same rule applies with the English wheel as it does with your anvils when you're using hammer and dolly, or your anvil when you are planishing. So your anvil, your lower die on the English wheel, you want that to match whatever you've got as the curve in your panel. Now, if I look at the panel this way, the panel seems quite flat. If I look at it this way, it's got a completely different radius, right? So what's our radius this way? We've got, and I mean, it does change, right? So I'd say that's an 8, right? For most of that. Wow, quite consistently an 8. So the center of that is an 8 that way, right? But here, what's that? That's got to be like a 2 or something. Yeah, it's closer to a 2 on the side. So if I were to use, you know, an anvil this way, I would have to use an 8, and then I'd have to use a 2. And what were we saying about anvils? That the higher crown, the less contact patch, the more likely you are to stretch, right? So you want to always use the flattest anvil when you are planishing. And there's also in arrangement and out of arrangement if you want to get even flatter. So if I were to bend this even more this way, it would be even flatter this way, right? Or right now, we've got all this curve. What if I bend it? If I bend it like this, it goes flat. So that's out of arrangement. We could potentially be working this panel in the English wheel this way with a flatter anvil because I bent it. I put it out of arrangement to do work, right? But in this case, for this panel, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work it this way through the English wheel. So I'm going to choose an anvil that works for most of the top with this. And I do want to do a slight crosshatch pattern. Maybe not a dead nuts 90, but a slight crosshatch pattern so that my overlapping track marks sort of look like a diamond. Basically, what that's doing is just allowing you to smooth it 2 different ways. So it might be smooth this way, but if you cross it, you'll get some of those lines from your wheels out of it as well. So you're gonna like make it even smoother. So I'm gonna look at this. I'm gonna use my radius gauge. By the way, we do sell these on the website. These are what we call the Gucci gauges. They are way too expensive to manufacture, so they're very expensive, and I think that we've already run out of them. But we do have another set of radius gauge, or sorry, another gauge like this that is, I think it's like, was it 40 bucks or something? Yeah, I think it's like 40 bucks. So that you can accurately measure all your radiuses. And we make them in-house. Elio and I just bang them out for you guys. So what radius do I want to use? It'll probably end up being, okay, see 12 is too much, right? So 24. That's what we're looking at. That's like a 24 for most of it, right? Okay, so 24. That's the anvil we want, or at least we want to get as close as we can. I don't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 13 anvils for the English wheel. I only have a few. So I'm just going to use whatever is the closest. Ooh, these are dirty. I think, yeah, that one's dead flat, right? So it'll be this one. I'm not sure what size this will be, but we can check. Okay, so it's a 12. So we've got a 12, we need a 24. It's close enough, especially for what we're doing today. So let's back this off. So a little bit too loose, tighten it up. You don't want to hear any like vibrating, basically. You know, you don't want to hear like a buzz, because it might be a little bit too loose. So you want to have a little bit of tension on it so that you feel the tops and bottoms getting hit. So the surface is all right, but it's not quite there yet. You can see where the wheel is making contact, but we're not quite contacting the entire way. What we're trying to achieve is we're trying to get to the point where we can see our track marks and they're uninterrupted and they're overlapping. That way we know that we've hit the entire surface of the material and it will all be smooth as it can be if your shape is there. There will be low spots and high spots at this point, especially because of how we're doing this. And at that point, you can kind of identify those spots. And if there is a little bit of a low spot, to bring that spot up, you can kind of circle around your low spot and stretch just that spot. So you could go back to the sandbag and you could hammer it or block it into the sandbag to add a little bit of surface area and then smooth it out again, planish it with the English wheel or by hand, whatever you like. And that's how you're gonna keep refining your shape. So let's tighten it up just a little bit here. We're gonna go over it again. I can hear it now that it is tracking 100% of the time. I might even go a tiny bit tighter. that the actual piece of metal is sort of curving, it's because it's, you know, it's going through the English wheel and it's changing its form, right? It's just kind of getting bent in a different way so that it can go through this machine. And so that's something that will have to be corrected every time, you know, you go to check it. You know, the more you do this, the more you practice the techniques, the easier it's going to be when you need to make that panel that you want to make, right? I encourage you to make a bunch of scrap in your shop and get to know these machines and the techniques so that when you do come to make a piece that you really want to keep, you won't be so frustrated and throwing everything away. Okay, back this off a bit, get her out of there. So the side of our tank that we've run over, you know, this area here, just think back to what that looked like, you know, a few minutes ago, right? The English wheel does a lot, and those are Harbor Freight dies. They're not special. This is just a stronger frame. There are plenty of YouTube videos out there. In fact, Ray Chalene, Pro Shaper Workshop, have a look at his stuff. He does have a video on how to strengthen up one of those yellow, cheap Harbor Freight wheels to become a machine that you can really use. And I'm not saying you can't use it as they are. They totally work. You could definitely do what I'm doing today with the Harbor Freight English wheel without changing anything. So now we've got to get to these edges. It's not so shallow of a curve. We've got to be able to go around this curve. So for us to work those edges, we're going to need to know this radius so that we can change our anvil. I expect it to be, what is it, an 8? No, sharper. 7, no. 6, 6 for a bit of it anyway. We'll go to a 6. Another cool thing that you can do with English wheels is that you see how the center of the crown is always in the center, which is like an inch in from the edge. Wherever that wheel is touching will always be in the center. But what you can do is you can actually shim one of the sides up, and then your contact patch moves to the outside. And think about when that's going to work, right? If you want to use the English wheel to do linear stretching, like you want to wheel a flange like we were just talking about and visualizing earlier, that is how you do it. You actually lift the edge of the wheel so that the contact patch is closer to the outside. And then you can work flanges and that type of thing. Okay, back on topic. No more segues. Okay, we're just going to smooth this out. This is a little bit difficult because you're right on an edge, but this is where actually it really helps to have a wheel that has an exposed upper wheel. If you had an exposed upper wheel, you can sort of use it. Well, I can kind of do it right now. It's almost easier to do it with your hand moving it. Like I'm actually driving the wheel with my right hand right now. Try and work some of those spots out. Here's an interesting thing I'm going to tell you guys. See how loose it is here? I can actually go like that. There's not much shrink in that spot, right? Here, I can't do that. I can't do it. Why is that? It's because of what I said earlier. It is actually thicker where you shrink, right? That metal is clay. It actually got thicker. You actually pushed it together. It doesn't make sense sometimes when you think about how hard metal is, but you have to start thinking about it like it is clay because it moves like that. You just have to give it no option, right? You have to just force it with a tool, with a bowl, with a sandbag and a hammer. Like, you kind of got to tell it where to go, but it acts like clay. Just to get this area in here that tank is kind of bending, right? It's forcing itself into a little bit different form so that we can actually get the wheels on the surface here. The other thing worth mentioning as well with an English wheel is that, and any anvil, any hammer, anything, whatever is touching your sheet metal is going to imprint, right? Because it's clay, you stick your thumbprint in clay, that's what's happening with your hammer, right? If you've got a rough surface on the hammer, that rough surface is going to transfer into the material. A lot of the times your anvils and your hammer heads are harder than your surface material. That is the goal anyway. I've definitely got some non-hardened tools that I use. But whatever is harder is going to transfer. So if you clean the wheels, if you polish the wheels, if you clean your hammer, your dollies, you polish, those will transfer, right? Excuse me. So that's why you're seeing how shiny this is because the shininess of the wheel is actually transferring the polish onto the material. So I'm not actually going to go too much farther with this because I feel like you guys get the point and we've covered a lot of information right now. So what I'll do right now is we'll just put this back into form and kind of have a look at it. So I'm going to bend the bottom a little bit, kind of flattens it out. Same thing here, that form, we've got to get that a little bit back. It's far from perfect, but for our demonstration purposes, you know, you can kind of get the idea on how you could make a gas tank at home, right? If you had a buck to match this to right now, what we would be doing is we'd be putting it to the buck. Bucks are something that we briefly touched on, but you could make them out of wire, like Ferraris back in the day, like, and even now today, like they make wire bucks, like pieces of wire as a skeleton for them to put the paper onto so that they can show where those wrinkles are on the paper and mark them out and transfer that onto the sheet metal. That's your roadmap to shrinking, to metal shaping, to stretching, to all those things. So that's why I'm saying this is not hard. What I just did is not hard. You could do this too. This is just making a piece, you know, look impressive, but isn't for anything. The next step would be refining it against a buck, right? Trying to actually make it fit, make a second side that looks the same, have the exact same amount of shrink in the exact same amount of places to mimic another side, which we will get into in future videos and we have talked about in the past. But I hope this video has been helpful for you guys and girls because for myself, growing up, I had a very difficult time learning those very simple things. That I could shrink and stretch relatively easily with hand tools and it wasn't going to take me a million years. So I hope that everybody gets started with this and get yourself a sandbag, get yourself a hammer, and just start playing with it. If you find a good deal on an English wheel, go for it. If you can afford to buy one, definitely get one, and as well as some of the other tools that we talked about. Check out the rest of the channel. There's a ton of like home-built tools as well. We turn files into slappers, we turn leaf springs into slappers. We show you how to polish and treat your hammers and dollies so that you can have that surface finish that you're looking for, and as well as we've made power hammers on the channel and done a bunch of the other stuff. So I'll put a few of those links in the description just so that you guys can have a look at what we got going on. But thanks a lot, everybody. Really appreciate all of you supporting the channel, and we'll catch you on the next one. Don't forget, we're on Patreon as well, and if you want any of the stuff that we sell, japhandskustoms.com. Catch you next time. Thanks.